She was just a hitchhiker on the side of the road, her thumb out, her eyes tired but determined. Malik Johnson, a broke CEO struggling to keep his failing tech startup alive, never thought twice about offering her a ride. He was just trying to get through the day, to solve his own problems, until one simple act of kindness set him on a path that would turn his world upside down. What he didn't know was that the woman sitting next to him wasn't just an ordinary traveler. She was Maya West, a millionaire on the run, hiding from ruthless people who wanted more than just her fortune. They wanted her life. As Malik found himself pulled deeper into her dangerous game, he quickly realized that helping a stranger might cost him everything he's worked for. Now, trapped between loyalty and survival, Malik must decide whether to risk it all to protect her, or walk away and save himself. You won't believe the twists that unfold as Malik's world collides with Maya's dangerous secrets. Stay tuned for Broke Black Man CEO picks up a hitchhiker, not knowing she's a millionaire on the run. A broken down sedan rolled down a dusty highway, the engine sputtering as the sun began to dip below the horizon. The orange and pink streaks of the setting sun bathed the landscape in a warm glow, but Malik Johnson barely noticed. His eyes, tired and worn from months of stress, were fixed on the road ahead, the engine's sputters making his stomach tight. Malik was a man in his early 30s, but the weight on his shoulders made him feel much older. As CEO of a once promising tech startup, he had been on the verge of greatness. A few months ago, his company was one of the hottest names in Silicon Valley, but now, it was barely staying afloat, and Malik could see the end coming like a freight train in his rearview mirror. Bills piled up, employees were starting to lose faith in him, and his investors were already whispering about cutting their losses. In a desperate attempt to hold on to what little was left, Malik had just attended a tense meeting with his investors, where they had delivered an ultimatum: turn the company around in 30 days, or we pull the plug. That wasn't just a threat, it was a death sentence. His startup had been his everything, and now it was slipping through his fingers. The clock was ticking, and the pressure to find a miracle had never been heavier. His mind was a whirlwind of numbers, deadlines, and fears as he drove down the empty stretch of highway, trying to clear his head. The car's engine gave another strained cough, and Malik's grip tightened on the wheel. He muttered a curse under his breath. This was the last thing he needed right now, a breakdown. He could feel the sweat beginning to bead on his forehead. The sedan was old, barely running, and given his current financial situation, there was no way he could afford the repair costs. Malik pulled over to the side of the road, hoping to salvage whatever he could from this mess. The sun was sinking lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the empty landscape. The silence around him seemed deafening as he stepped out of the car and popped the hood. The engine was smoking now, and the smell of burnt oil filled the air. He leaned over the engine, inspecting it, but it was no use. The car was shot, and the nearest mechanic was miles away. The weight of his failed meeting and the impending collapse of his startup hit him like a ton of bricks. There was no miracle on the horizon, and that's when he saw her. A figure on the side of the road caught his eye. At first it was just a silhouette against the setting sun, but as she came closer, he could make out the details. A woman, standing there, her thumb raised in the universal sign for a. She looked out of place, dressed in an expensive-looking coat despite the rural surroundings. Her hair was slightly disheveled, and her expression seemed a mix of exhaustion and determination. Something about her felt off, like she was a part of a world that didn't belong here. She looked weary, but there was a certain composure about her, like someone who had faced hardship and survived. Malik hesitated. His instincts told him to be cautious. He had no idea who she was or where she was headed, and this stretch of highway was known for its occasional oddity. But as he stood there, staring at the woman, he couldn't shake the feeling that something else was at play. Maybe it was the loneliness of the moment, or the overwhelming pressure of his own situation, but he found himself willing to take a chance. He rolled down the window, his voice wary but polite. "You need a ride." The woman glanced at him, her tired eyes meeting his with a mixture of gratitude and caution. She smiled faintly, the kind of smile that was more about survival than joy. "If you're heading south, I'd be grateful," she said, her voice soft but steady. Malik studied her for a moment, unsure of what to do. There was something about her that seemed almost too polished for someone standing on the side of the road. But then again, life had a way of surprising people, and he couldn't bring himself to leave her stranded out here, especially with how dark it was getting. Besides, he thought, maybe the company would be good for him. Despite his own financial troubles, Malik wasn't the type to leave someone in need. His mother had raised him with a strong sense of responsibility and compassion, so against his better judgment, he motioned for her to get in. Hop in, it's not much, but it'll get you where you're going. The woman didn't hesitate. She slid into the passenger seat, offering him a nod of thanks as she buckled her seatbelt. Malik couldn't help but notice how delicate and refined her movements were, a stark contrast to the dusty roads they were traveling. As he started the car and pulled back onto the highway, he couldn't shake the feeling that this decision, like so many others in his life recently, might not turn out the way he expected. But for now, all he could do was drive, 1 mile at a time. The silence between them was thick, but neither of them seemed eager to break it. Malik glanced at her briefly, trying to piece together the mystery that surrounded her. Who was she? Why was she out here in the middle of nowhere? And what had brought her to this particular stretch of road, at this particular moment? The questions lingered in his mind, but he pushed them aside, focusing on the road ahead. He had enough problems of his own to deal with. But little did Malik know, his life was about to take a turn he could never have imagined. As they drove down the quiet highway, the world outside the car seemed to blur into the dusky landscape. The sun was nearly gone now, leaving only a faint pink and purple glow on the horizon. The road stretched out endlessly before them, a ribbon of asphalt, cutting through the vast emptiness of the countryside. The air inside the car was cool, but thick with an unspoken tension. Malik's hands gripped the wheel tightly, his eyes fixed on the road ahead, though his mind wandered back to his failing startup. The meeting with his investors earlier that day was still fresh in his mind, the looming threat of failure hanging over him like a dark cloud. He thought about the 30-day deadline. He thought about his employees, who were beginning to lose faith. He thought about the mountain of bills that seemed to grow higher with every passing day. The quiet hum of the engine was interrupted only by the occasional chirp of crickets outside. Malik's phone buzzed in his pocket, its persistent vibration pulling him back to reality. He glanced down at it, his stomach tightening when he saw the name on the screen, one of his investors. He knew it was probably another reminder of how much time he had left to fix everything. But instead of answering, Malik simply slid the phone back into his pocket and focused on the road. He didn't want to think about that now. He was already drowning in his own worries. To his surprise, the silence in the car wasn't uncomfortable. It was just, the woman sitting next to him hadn't said a word since she got in. She had been staring out the window, her face unreadable, lost in her own thoughts. Malik wasn't sure if he should try to make conversation, but he felt an odd compulsion to break the silence. It felt like an opening, a chance to learn something about this mysterious stranger he'd decided to help. "So where are you headed?" he asked, keeping his tone casual, hoping to ease the distance between them. The woman shifted slightly in her seat, her eyes still trained on the passing scenery. Her voice was soft, but there was a calmness to it that made Malik pause. "Just trying to get away, a little change of scenery, I guess." Her words seemed neutral, almost rehearsed. Malik couldn't help but notice the slight distance in her voice, as if she was holding something back. There was a sadness there, buried beneath the surface. His curiosity kicked in, but he didn't want to push too hard, especially since she hadn't given much away. Still, something about her felt out of place, like a story that wasn't quite being told. He decided to joke, hoping to lighten the mood a little. "Sounds like you're running from something," he said with a slight grin. To his surprise, the woman let out a small chuckle, but it was hollow, lacking any real joy. Her eyes, still distant, flickered toward him for just a moment, before she looked back out the window. "Something like that." Malik nodded, the hint of a frown tugging at the corner of his mouth. He'd met enough people in his life to know when someone was hiding something. This woman, though she appeared calm and collected on the surface, was clearly carrying more than she was willing to share. But again, maybe it was none of his business. After all, he had his own problems to deal with. "We all need a fresh start sometimes," Malik said, trying to ease the tension with a shrug. It was a phrase he'd used countless times before, even though he didn't know if he believed it anymore. His own fresh start felt like a distant dream, something that was slipping farther away with every failed attempt to fix his business. The woman didn't respond right away. She just continued staring out the window, her face unreadable. There was something about her that seemed out of place in this small town, even more than the polished coat she wore. It was like she didn't belong in this rural, dusty world. Her presence felt like a foreign element, an anomaly in the midst of the ordinary. It wasn't just her clothes or the way she carried herself, it was the way she held back, the way she stayed just out of reach, as if the answers to her story were locked behind some invisible barrier. Malik glanced over at her again, studying the way she seemed to withdraw into herself, even as she was physically present. Her lips were pressed together, her eyes flicking briefly to the rearview mirror, as though making sure no one was following. Malik caught that movement, and for the first time he felt a chill run down his spine. It was subtle, but it was there, a flicker of something that didn't quite add up. Was she being cautious? Was she hiding from something, or someone? He didn't know, but the sense of mystery surrounding her had only deepened in the short time they'd been driving. The road stretched on, the silence hanging between them like a thick fog. Malik couldn't shake the feeling that this woman, this stranger, was more than just someone passing through. There was a weight to her presence, a tension that made him feel like he was only seeing the surface of something much larger and far more complicated. But he pushed the thought aside. He had enough on his plate. The company, the bills, the looming deadline, those were the things that mattered right now. This woman's story, whatever it was, could wait, or so he told himself. Yet, as the miles passed, Malik found it harder to ignore the feeling that fate had just handed him a much larger mystery than he'd ever expected. And somehow, in the midst of his own turmoil, it seemed like this woman had entered his life for a reason. What that reason was, however, he couldn't yet begin to imagine. The miles passed quickly as Malik and the woman continued down the road, the silence between them now feeling less awkward. They'd exchanged a few casual stories, small talk, to fill the void of a long drive. Malik found himself oddly at ease, something he hadn't felt in weeks. Between his crumbling business and the pressure mounting from his investors, he'd barely had time to breathe, let alone have a simple conversation. But here in the comfort of the car, with this strange woman, it felt different. She didn't ask about his work, his troubles, or the things he was fighting to hold together. Instead, she spoke briefly of her travels, her vague explanations about needing a change of scenery, about running from something. It wasn't much, but it was enough to create a connection, a brief respite from the chaos he was drowning in. For a moment, Malik could almost forget about the looming deadline, the demands and the threat to his company. But as much as he tried to enjoy the moment, something in the back of his mind nagged at him. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to her, something she wasn't saying. The way she looked out the window, in deep thought, the way she carefully avoided giving any concrete answers about her past. There was mystery there, and Malik couldn't help but feel that he'd stumbled into something much larger than a simple ride along a quiet highway. After a couple of hours on the road, the low hum of the car's engine, and the rhythmic tapping of the tires against the road, seemed to lull him into a false sense of calm. The dark skies stretched above them, the stars twinkling faintly. When they reached a small diner just off the highway, Malik felt the tension in his shoulders begin to ease. It was a modest place, just a neon sign, a few worn tables, and the comforting smell of greasy diner food wafting through the air. He was hungry and tired, and the prospect of a warm meal felt like a small victory. They entered the diner together, and Malik suggested they sit down for a bite to eat. As they slid into a booth, the waitress, a woman with tired eyes and a permanent frown, gave them a quick once-over before taking their order. The conversation between them flowed easily, more natural now that the weight of the road had loosened its grip. They talked about everything and nothing, life, travel, small personal details. But as the minutes ticked by, Malik still couldn't shake the feeling that there was something off about the woman sitting across from him. It wasn't just her words, but something deeper, an underlying tension in the way she held herself, in the way she avoided giving too much away. Then as he finished his meal and excused himself to use the restroom, everything shifted. The diner's bathroom was small, dimly lit, and smelled faintly of cleaning supplies. Malik washed his hands, lost in thought, trying to piece together what was bothering him. But as he turned to leave, a voice from the hallway caught his attention. It was a man's voice, low, urgent, and tinged with panic. "Are you sure she was in the car? We need to find her before the authorities do." Malik froze, his heart skipping a beat. He leaned slightly closer to the door, instinctively straining to listen. The voice was frantic now, speaking to someone on the other side of the counter. Malik couldn't see the speaker, but he could hear the desperation in his words. "She's the one who's got it," the man continued. "We can't let anyone find out. If they do, we're done." Malik's mind raced, his pulse quickening. Who is he talking about? He thought of the woman in the car. Was it possible? Could she be the one they were looking for? His stomach twisted as a dozen questions flooded his mind. Who was this man, and why was he looking for her so urgent? He didn't stay long enough to hear more. He quickly turned and left the bathroom, his thoughts racing. When he returned to the table, the woman was gone. Malik stopped in his tracks, confusion setting in. The seat across from him was empty, and the diner seemed just as quiet as before. He scanned the room quickly. Nothing. There was no sign of her anywhere. His heart sank, as the questions he'd been trying to ignore bubbled to the surface. Where had she gone? She couldn't have left without him noticing. He hadn't seen her walk out of the door, and the thought of her slipping away unnoticed made him uneasy. His eyes fell on the table, and his breath caught in his throat. There, neatly placed on the surface, was a small stack of bills, more than enough to cover their meal and then some. The amount was too much, almost deliberately so, as if someone wanted to leave a specific impression, as if someone wanted him to find it. Malik felt his pulse quicken. Something was wrong. This wasn't just about a ride anymore. This woman, whoever she was, wasn't just a stranger. She was involved in something bigger, something dangerous, and now, he had been pulled into it, whether he liked it or not. His phone buzzed in his pocket, snapping him out of his thoughts. He pulled it out, hoping for a distraction. It was another message from his investor. "You've got 24 hours left to fix things. No more extensions." The knot in his stomach tightened, but his mind kept drifting back to the woman, her sudden disappearance, the conversation he'd overheard, and the pile of cash left behind. Something didn't add up. He knew he needed to focus on his company, on the deadline that loomed large, but the mystery of the woman and the shadows she had cast over his life was far too compelling to ignore. For the first time in a long while, Malik felt like his life wasn't just about saving a business, it was about surviving whatever storm was about to hit. As Malik stepped out of the diner, his thoughts swirling, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was horribly wrong. His mind kept replaying the conversation he'd overheard in the bathroom, the panic in the man's voice, and the cryptic words about finding her before the authorities did. Who were they talking about? Was it the woman he had just spent the last few hours driving with? His eyes scanned the quiet empty parking lot, the silence of the sleepy town now seeming unnerving. Then in the corner of his eye, something caught his attention. A sleek black car, parked by the side of the road. It was the kind of car you'd expect to see in a city, not a small rural diner in the middle of nowhere. The dark tinted windows, the polished finish, and the subtle but unmistakable aura of luxury, stood out like a sore thumb. Malik's heart skipped a beat, as a rush of unease shot through him. Could it be hers? Was this her getaway vehicle, or was someone else involved? Either way, it didn't feel right. His instincts told him to stay, to keep watching. The hair on the back of his neck stood on end as his gut screamed at him that he needed to know more. Without thinking twice, he got back into his car and, against his better judgment, followed the black car at a cautious distance. His hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, his mind racing with question. The road was empty, the occasional street lamp flickering as he drove, but all his attention was focused on the car in front of him. His thoughts were tangled in confusion and suspicion, but something inside him urged him to keep going. As he rounded a bend in the road, he saw her. The woman he had just shared a meal with was standing near the back of the black car, her body language rigid with fear. She was talking to two men in dark suits, their expressions hard and unfriendly. Malik's pulse quickened. The way they were speaking, the way they moved, it was clear they weren't just regular travelers passing through. They were looking for something, or someone. Malik instinctively pulled his car behind a large truck parked on the side of the road, keeping himself hidden in the shadow. He couldn't hear much of the conversation, but from the body language and the tense movements, he could tell the situation was serious. The woman was visibly uncomfortable, her posture rigid, her hands twitching at her sides as though she was trying to keep control of her emotion. The men, on the other hand, were calm but authoritative, their voices low and forceful. Malik couldn't make out the words, but the atmosphere was charged with danger. He watched as the two men exchanged quick, sharp glances, scanning the area as though they were expecting someone or something to show up. It was clear that the woman wasn't just some random traveler. She was in trouble, serious trouble. His phone buzzed in his pocket, the screen lighting up with another message from his investor. "Time is running out, Malik. You need to fix things now." Malik didn't check it. His mind was too focused on the scene unfolding in front of him. The message about his failing business seemed trivial now, dwarfed by the danger that was only a few feet away. He was caught between two worlds, his crumbling startup and the strange, escalating situation in front of him. But for some reason, his instincts told him that this was where he was meant to be, even if it felt like everything else was falling apart. The two men finally turned and started walking toward the black car, clearly ready to leave. The woman remained standing, her eyes downcast, her body trembling. It was as if she was trying to process everything happening around her. The tension in the air was palpable, and Malik couldn't help but feel like this was only the beginning of something much bigger than a random hitchhiker. When the men got in the car and sped off, Malik took a deep breath and pulled his car out from behind the truck. He didn't hesitate this time. He had to talk to her. He had to know what was going on. He couldn't just walk away and pretend everything was fine. As he approached, he saw the woman standing by herself, her back slightly hunched, her hands nervously tugging at the fabric of her coat. The woman looked utterly drained, as if the weight of the world was pressing down on her shoulder.
Her eyes were wide, scanning the parking lot in fear, as if she were afraid someone might still be watching. Malik parked his car nearby and stepped out. His voice was low and steady, trying to keep the situation calm. "Hey, you okay?" he asked, his eyes softening as he looked at her. She looked up at him, startled. For a moment, she said nothing, just staring at him with wide, frantic eyes. Then, as if the floodgates had opened, she spoke, her voice trembling with emotion. "I didn't mean for you to get involved," she said, her breath shaky. I'm not who I said I was." Malik's chest tightened as her words sank in. What did she mean? Who was she really? The woman he had met earlier didn't seem capable of causing any harm, but there was something deeper going on here, something dangerous. Before Malik could respond, the screech of tires interrupted the moment. A black SUV suddenly skidded into the parking lot, its headlights blinding him momentarily. The woman's eyes widened in panic, and she took a step back, her voice almost frantic. "You need to leave, now." Malik didn't understand, but the urgency in her tone was enough to send his heart racing. Without thinking, he backed away from her, his eyes never leaving her face as she turned to look toward the SUV. Whatever this was, it was way over his head, but there was no turning back now. The woman's warning echoed in his mind as he hesitated. Should he leave, or stay and see where this twisted path would lead? The moment Maya grabbed Malik's arm, he felt a jolt of adrenaline surge through him. "We have to go now," she said, her voice frantic, barely above a whisper but full of urgency. The black SUV was already rolling toward them, its headlights cutting through the dim parking lot like a predator closing in on its prey. Malik's heart hammered in his chest, his mind raced, but his body reacted before he could fully process what was happening. He fumbled for his car keys, his hands shaking as he reached into his pockets, the weight of the situation bearing down on him. He had no idea what was going on, but his instincts told him he couldn't leave Maya behind. Not now, not after everything he'd seen. "Come on," Maya urged, pulling him closer as the car door swung open. She jumped into the passenger seat with frantic energy, and Malik followed, slamming the door behind him. Without a second thought, he shoved the keys into the ignition, and the engine roared to life. The tires screeched as he pulled out of the parking lot, the black SUV following close behind. Malik glanced in the rearview mirror, trying to make out the details, but the darkness of the night made it hard to see. Maya's hands were clenched in her lap, her knuckles white from the tension. She was breathing heavily, her chest rising and falling rapidly. Malik had never seen anyone so scared before. As they sped down the empty highway, the tension between them felt suffocating. The world outside the car blurred, but within the confines of the vehicle, it felt like everything was closing in. The only sound was the engine, and the rush of wind against the windows, and Malik's mind whirled with questions he didn't know how to ask. Finally, Maya broke the silence. Her voice, still shaky but more composed now, spoke the words that would change everything. "I'm not just some random person, Malik," she said, her eyes flicking to him for the briefest of moments. "I'm a millionaire. I inherited a fortune, but I've been running from people who want to take it from me. I thought I could escape, but they always find me." Malik's jaw dropped. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. A millionaire. It didn't make sense. She looked so normal, so unassuming. But as she spoke, he realized there was so much more to her than the image she had projected. Maya West. He knew the name. The heir to a massive tech fortune. A woman whose inheritance made her a target for anyone who wanted to get their hands on it. "Wait. You're Maya West?" Malik asked, his voice barely a whisper, as the truth began to sink in. She nodded, her eyes fixed on the road ahead. "I didn't want anyone to know. I didn't want to bring that kind of attention to myself. But it didn't matter. The moment I got my hands on the money, they started coming after me, and they won't stop until they get it." Malik's mind was reeling. He had heard of her before, the stories of her family's fortune, the rumors about shady dealings, the whispers of corporate warfare and dirty tactics. But hearing it from her, hearing her speak so plainly about it, changed everything. He'd been dealing with his own share of problems with his failing business, but nothing could have prepared him for the weight of the situation Maya was in. But it wasn't just about money, she explained. As they drove through the night, Maya told him more about the real danger she faced, about the people who weren't just after her wealth, but something far more valuable. "I have secrets, Malik," she said, her voice quiet now, almost as though she were speaking to herself. "Things that go beyond my inheritance, corruption, betrayal, things that powerful people would do anything to cover up." Malik's head spun with the new information. He felt like he had been thrown into a world he wasn't prepared for, a world of high-stakes games and dangerous players, a world that had little to do with tech startups and business meetings. This wasn't just about a failing company anymore. It was about survival, about choosing sides in a battle that had been brewing long before Malik even understood the rules. He glanced at Maya as she stared out the window, her face tense, her eyes filled with the weight of everything she was carrying. "I don't know if I can do this," she whispered, almost to herself. "I thought I could handle it, but every time I think I'm safe, they find me. It's like there's no escape." Malik didn't know what to say. He had his own problems, his own battles to fight, but something in Maya's eyes made him feel like this wasn't just a random encounter. His instincts were screaming at him, that his life was about to change forever, and he couldn't turn away from it. As the night stretched on and the road seemed endless, Malik's phone buzzed again. This time, when he checked the screen, it was a message from his investor. His heart sank. "You're running out of time. Help her, and the company will be saved. You have 24 hours to make your decision."
Malik stared at the message, his mind racing. Help Maya? It seemed insane. His company was on the brink of collapse. His investors were demanding answers, and now he was being thrust into a high-stakes situation involving corruption, betrayal, and an inheritance worth billions. How could he even begin to choose? But as he glanced over at Maya, her face pale and drawn, he realized something. He couldn't walk away from this. Not anymore. The decision had already been made. Whatever it was that Maya was running from, whatever dangerous web she was tangled in, it was now part of his world. Whether he liked it or not, he was in this with her. He looked at her, determination building in his chest. "I'll help you," he said, his voice steady. "I don't know what's going on, but I'll help you." Maya looked at him, her eyes filled with a mix of gratitude and fear. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You don't know what you're getting into, but I'll do my best to keep you safe." Malik nodded, though the weight of the decision felt heavier than ever. He had no idea where this path would lead, but one thing was certain: his life and the life of his company would never be the same again. As Malik continued to drive into the unknown with Maya by his side, a sense of inevitability settled over him. He'd gone from a desperate CEO scrambling to keep his failing startup afloat, to someone embroiled in a high-stakes game he never asked to play. The world he had once known, with its meetings, pitches, and numbers, felt like a distant memory, replaced by danger, uncertainty, and secrets far beyond anything he'd ever imagined. His hands gripped the steering wheel tighter, the weight of the situation sinking in. Maya's revelations had thrown him into a world that was nothing like the one he'd left behind. From the moment he'd agreed to help her, there was no turning back. She wasn't just any woman on the run, she was an heiress, a key player in a deadly game involving far more than money. The corruption, the betrayal, everything that had followed her had now followed him, and he was too far in to simply walk away. Malik couldn't help but reflect on how quickly everything had spiraled. Just hours ago he was fighting for his startup, barely keeping it together. Now, he was racing down a highway with a woman who had just confessed that her very life and her fortune were under constant threat. The threat wasn't only from unknown enemies, it was from the powerful people who wanted everything she had, and they'd stop at nothing to get it. With each passing mile, Malik found himself facing a hard truth. He wasn't just saving a company anymore, he was saving his own soul, trying to understand what kind of man he wanted to be when the dust finally settled. His decisions from here on out wouldn't just affect his business, they would shape the rest of his life. Helping Maya wasn't a simple choice, it was a risk. A gamble that could either pay off or destroy everything he'd worked for. His survival instinct told him to play it safe, to cut ties with her, and focus solely on his business. But something deeper, something that had been dormant within him, now began to stir. Would he choose to follow the path of self-preservation, retreating into the comfort of his old world, or would he embrace the danger, standing by Maya and helping her navigate the treacherous waters that surrounded her? Malik didn't have the answers yet, but for the first time in a long while, he felt like he was actually in control of his future. This wasn't just about financial recovery, it was about loyalty, about making choices that defined who he was as a person, not just a CEO. The uncertainty loomed over him, but it was no longer as terrifying. In fact, there was something liberating about it. For the first time in a long while, Malik felt alive. He had no idea where this road would lead, or if he'd come out of it unscathed. But he knew one thing for sure, he couldn't back down now. The next chapter of his life wasn't just about saving a business, it was about survival, about discovering the kind of person he could be when faced with the impossible, and about loyalty to someone who had unexpectedly become his partner in a fight he didn't even fully understand. Whatever the outcome, Malik realized that he had already stepped into a world far bigger than himself, and there was no turning back. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this thrilling ride full of suspense, mystery, and unexpected twists, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more stories like this. Drop a comment below and let us know what you would have done in Malik's shoes. Would you have helped Maya, or would you have walked away? The choices we make in life often lead us down paths we never expect. Stay tuned for more adventures, and remember, you never know who you might meet on the road. The next hitchhiker could change everything. See you in the next video.